really have a brief but two-part program. And Vladimir, I'm going to let you do introductions, but Dr. Zakharov, who's an academician and a brilliant scientist, is a member of the public body, which is appointed by the president, non-parliamentary, but a third house, if you will. And he'll introduce our friends from upper lower houses and some of our friends from the NGO community who are visiting from Russia also. They will talk a little about what they're doing in the context of collaboration, caucus building, if you will, clubs in there. One of our congressmen is from the Caucasus, and so caucus and caucuses are a little confusing, but they're conservation clubs. But even before that, we're going to introduce a partner of ours from the Wild Salmon Center. Greg, you ought to come up. Greg Block. The Wild Salmon Center there are two Wild Salmon Centers. There's an American one and there's a Russian one. We have leader, Guido, who you will also meet, who is running the Russian Wild Salmon Center. Greg runs government affairs. His organization is the American Wild Salmon Center. They are partners and ours. They'll tell you a little about what they're doing and the importance of it. But this is a starting point for us in engaging our Russian neighbors, and that we share this enormous common resource in the North Pacific. So thanks for being here, Greg.
Thank you. Listen. You want to come up?
Come on up. You've seen this before anyway.
Well, actually, if you sit here, you might see it.
Yeah,
and then do okay.
Thank you, David. I'm going to take no more than 15 minutes and just provide some context for, just to show you some pictures of beautiful Russian Far East, to give you a little context on environmental cooperation in a very concrete setting through the window of wild salmon conservation and sustainable use. Not because that's the only thing we need to cooperate on. That's a window that our organization works on, and I think it's a good concrete example of what we're talking about. But before I do that, I do want to thank the ICCF for really putting a lot of energy and enthusiasm into organizing this event. David Barron and his staff, Susan and John, have just worked an awful lot to get this together, and especially our Russian colleagues who have just shown stamina and interest and have earned all of our respect for just a great ability to listen and converse. And as David said, we've been learning from them in our work on salmon conservation for a long time in Russia. It's an American organization working in Russia. All we can do is support them. We can share our experience of how we lost our salmon on the Atlantic and how that happened, and the many millions of dollars we've spent in trying to restore them in the Pacific Northwest. And then we can apply these experiences together in the Great North Pacific, where we share an ecosystem, three of the most productive seas that generate billions of dollars worth of fish for our fishing communities, jobs, and sustain these environmental benefits that we need for our economy, culture, and obviously ecology. So I thank them, but I'll get to the presentation really quick, and please enjoy. I refrained deliberately from a cupcake, knowing it would impair my communication skills, but did set one aside. But continue to enjoy the amenities that are here. Let me show you really quick, as David mentioned, we're dedicated to identifying, understanding, and protecting the best remaining, the healthiest remaining wild salmon ecosystems across the range of wild Pacific salmon. Not just a strategy for one or two basins or a region, but range-wide. And we'll talk about that range in a minute. So I mentioned our shared North Pacific ecosystem. I'm going to move away from that.
From here, I can read it. From the corner, probably could be used.
What we're talking about is the world's most productive fishery. You all know the crab, pollock, salmon, and other commercially valuable fisheries, but this is a shared ecosystem in the North Pacific. The Bering Sea, the Sea of Okhotsk, the Sea of Japan, they're all connected and interdependent in ways that we don't even understand yet. And they're all challenged as never before by climate change and other drivers that are going to require increased cooperation on a level that our countries have never reached before. If If anybody doubts the need or questions the need for Russia and the United States to further deepen their environmental cooperation, all they have to do is look at some hard, cold facts. Over 2/3 of the world's boreal forests are in this area, well over half of our fresh water, and some of our main keystone species, the species that we care about most, they're also commercially valuable and are a matter of food security, are generated in this region. This is just a quick map. This shows you salmon ecoregions as defined by nearshore conditions, and they give you a sense. The range of wild Pacific salmon basically extends from, it used to be Baja California, it's now Southern California, up over the arc of the Pacific to the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, and Alaska, across the Bering Sea, Kamchatka, an epicenter of abundance and diversity in Russia, and down through the mainland Russian Far East as far as Japan and a few remnant populations in the Koreans. Ports of wild salmon we've mentioned, but it is a good window because it's a species that ties all of this together: the economy, the culture, food, and of course the environment. Ecologically, it's a keystone species. That means it's a species that a lot of other species depend on. Over 180 other species depend on it. Notably bears, eagles, things that we care about, feed on salmon as we do as people. It's an indicator of health. And it's a very important indicator because it mediates both the freshwater ecosystems, which are less well understood by our scientists, and the marine environment. An economic driver, as we mentioned, major source of employment, and this is a eminently sustainable employment if the harvest is sustainable and the habitat is protected. And as we mentioned, it's a food security issue. This map shows you the status and trends of wild Pacific salmon. The dark blue mean the healthiest salmon populations, the most abundant and diverse populations. And the lighter colors are populations that have been in decline. And as you can see, the population abundance contracts northward, pretty much as population density increases, salmon population has tended to decrease. But we still have some very healthy wild salmon populations. This isn't a story of too little too late. This is let's get ahead of the curve. It's much cheaper to protect than restore. And as you can see, Alaska, the Bristol Bay area, Alaska has some of the world's best salmon runs. Kamchatka, roughly the size of California, but the population of Toledo, Ohio. Beautiful, pristine salmon runs. Some threats that I'm sure all of you are aware of and we've been talking about throughout the course of the week, and how to confront these together. Climate change, warming oceans, ocean acidification. Several congressional members in both the House and Senate from both parties are very concerned about this issue and how to address it in a time frame that can deal with the issue. Some development issues. The Wild Salmon Center is certainly not an anti-development organization. We work collaboratively with a lot of private sector partners. But yes, there are some developments in some salmon-sensitive ecosystems that should not be pursued. Some are incompatible. We need to work with our private sector and determine together how they make sure that best practices are used and that some areas simply are off limits. A big problem with illegal, unreported, and unregulated fisheries. In the Russian Far East, there's a serious problem with poaching for red caviar, the salmon eggs. So what would an agenda look like? And this is just an example of the kinds of things that are discussed and one possible agenda that could emerge. And of course, we need multiple agendas and lots of different groups, and the ICCF and hopefully its counterpart in Russia to begin to explore these things together. Well, we need to adopt and renew commitments, existing commitments to ocean health and freshwater principles. That's a good starting point. What can we all agree upon that we need to restate and re-energize that already exists in our many binational and multilateral agreements? There's several existing mechanisms of cooperation. The Arctic Council, particularly important. New habitat, as it was formerly icebound in the Arctic, is being revealed and opened up. How is that going to be treated? Are we going to cooperate together and inventory those resources and manage them sustainably, or is it going to be a unilateral gold rush? Our work group of body agree on best management practices, including sharing wild fish policies, cooperative work to reduce the illegal fisheries, again a significant problem in our global commons, joint scientific research. There's discussion of the impacts of climate change. Salmon are an excellent indicator species. They're already being monitored. There's infrastructure for this, and they're commercially valuable. They're a leading indicator species of what's happening in climate change. The two countries could share research protocols on that issue. And of course, concerning creating a learning network to share what's working best in these most important wild salmon ecosystems. What's changed to build momentum for cooperation now? Well, several things, but it starts with leadership, both at home here in the United States and in Russia. Russia has some of the strongest protected area and a legacy of protected areas that really doesn't have its rival. They also have very strong protective regulations for salmon for watersheds and for forests, although they also have challenges with forest protection as we do. The Russians created the first ever whole watershed protected area on the coal for salmon, something we probably would have done if we'd had a chance on the Atlantic to protect our healthiest salmon ecosystems. They've showed global leadership on that issue. And now the United States has introduced in the House and Senate an incentive-based voluntary approach to identifying and protecting the healthiest remaining salmon ecosystems on the West Coast, with leadership from private sector groups, government agencies working on this, non-governmental organizations like Trout Unlimited. I think Shorn is here today, and the Wild Salmon Center. We're going to work cooperatively, build incentives to do preventative cooperation, to preventative conservation in these healthy systems. Canada has a terrific wild salmon policy, very challenging to implement, but it's on the books. And there's an emerging premium for sustainably harvested salmon. This is very important. We want to reward our fishing communities for their sustainable practices and reward it in the marketplace. Their livelihood depends on this, and ultimately, they're a source of, they have to be interested in protecting these places, and they have been. And it would be wise for us to support their efforts in the market. And of course, the growing threat of climate change brings a sense of urgency to us. I'm going to finish up. I just have to show you some pictures. Now, we've in our presentations before, we show a lot of pictures from this side of the Pacific, the wonderful salmon systems that we have in Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. But today, we're just going to show you an example of some of the beautiful, pristine watersheds in the Russian Far East. And of course, salmon aren't that complicated. You need to protect the habitat and make sure that development is compatible with maintaining healthy habitat. You need to have sustainable fisheries and healthy ocean. This is a prioritization process that is taking place on Sakhalin Island and Kamchatka to identify some of these healthy systems. And let's take a look at it. This is in Kamchatka, as I mentioned. Kolpakova floodplain. This is the way rivers should look. The Opala, coal rivers, I mentioned, now protected. This is a joint research station, Russian and U.S. on the coal. Vostochnaya and Sakhalin. The Koki in the Sea of Japan. And the Tagore River. Again, over. Samargad, beautiful system of ours. And another picture again. We mentioned market opportunities. Again, we need, through recreational angling and our consumer preferences, to reward healthy wild salmon markets. I think Trout Unlimited also has a campaign in the United States to do just that. And finally, we need to strengthen Pacific Rim cooperation and establish the International Learning Network. And that can only be done through partnerships. U.S. Forest Service is here today. They run a terrific program in Russia that accomplishes a lot of this, and several of our other partners from the departments, the private sector, the conservation community, and of course, our many and hopefully growing Russian partners. Thank you, David. I think that's our 15-minute context